I'm Dave Hitz. I'm one of the co-founders of NetApp. So, going way back, Unix kernel hacker type. I wanted to do a very quick description of some of the transformations that NetApp's gone through, because your comment about, well, NetApp's gotten to where it is as an enterprise-focused company, that's actually evolution number 3. And so I'm not going to do a slow walkthrough, but we have gone through some pretty radical change. And I think, in fact, our willingness to redefine ourselves is the reason that we're even still alive. NASDAQ told us that when you look at companies that go public, we're 25 years old. We passed our 20th anniversary on the NASDAQ. They said the number of companies that make their 20th anniversary was like less than 15. Teeny number. So we started actually as data storage for engineering work groups. A group of software engineers, CAD, chip design, and long about 94, 95, when the World Wide Web was hitting and ISPs were starting to be created, we discovered that they liked our style of storage. They were doing Ethernet everything. We were doing storage over Ethernet. And so we really invested in that space. Companies like Earthlink, AOL, MindSpring, a lot of those were our early customers, Amazon. And Yahoo was one of our biggest in that era. Somewhere in the late 90s, mid-late 90s, though Yahoo in particular came to us and said, we've been doubling quarterly with your gear, and we can't think of anything else we could have used to grow that fast of an environment, but we would throw you out in an instant. Your reliability's not there, your manageability's not there. We were building workgroup gear and they were deploying it in enterprise situations. So we went, it was telco. Remember, it went from email's my toy to email I'm running my business on, and oh look, a headline just went out, email went down, price crash. So we did a fundamental transition of our capabilities to go support the internet. In fact, that was the starting point. Later, after the tech crash, that was transition number 1, workgroup engineering to telco internet class stuff. After the tech crash in 2001, we were up a creek. Our top 10 customers from the previous year did not order a single new piece of hardware from us for the 6 months after that. The good news is we had started diversifying into enterprise, and it really was the collapse of tech that forced us to dig hard into that. So we were $1 billion at the end of the dot-com run-up, and we dropped 20%. It took us 3 years to get back to $1 billion again, having converted fundamentally to an enterprise company. The next thing that was going to kill us was VMware in the mid-2000s, and they were going to virtualize everything and software defined, and there'd be no longer any need for data storage. And we just didn't see it that way. We said, if you've got the capability to take servers and make them virtual, like, look, it's just one computer, but we'll lie and say it's 10. Wouldn't it be nice to have the exact same capability on the data back end? We'll thin provision it, we'll clone it, you want a copy of this? We can do it for disk storage-wise free. And we dug in hard, and even after EMC bought VMware, most analysts would say we partnered way better with VMware than the company that bought them and owned them, and continued to add value there through partnership. NetApp has always done a lot with partnering. And so now as the cloud emerges, once again, there's this thing out there that's going to kill us and we're doomed and it's all gone. And the approach that we've taken is, this is a hard problem. In fact, when you look at cloud, one of the most difficult things is the data part. Right? It's easy to fire up 1,000 VMs somewhere or 1,000 containers. The problem is, how do you get the data that they need? And after they're done, how do you know what you have and either leave it there but control it, or put it somewhere else? That's exactly the zone that we help with. So we feel like, although it's a really scary time, also we're well positioned. Data is very, very central. Data management, getting your arms around it. The question of what are you doing? Are you cracking the data? Are you now going to become a Hadoop competitor or do Spark? We tend to focus more in terms of data thinking, data analytics, on data about the data, right? There's the guts of your data, like what's that database say, but then there's lots of questions about the data. Where's it allowed to go? Who's allowed to see it? Who has seen it? What country is it in, right? These are the kinds of things, especially more so in Europe than in the US, but there's a whole bunch of legal issues, regulatory issues, and keeping track of where it's allowed to go and where it has gone and how to fix it if there's a disconnect. Those are among the kinds of zones, and then partnering on a lot of other fronts. So are we doomed? I think just from a business perspective, it's useful to look a little bit at the money dynamics. So one way of looking at this is we have, just rounding off, $5 billion about in the sort of traditional system-y, storage-y model. You buy systems, you buy software to run on those systems, you buy service contracts, you buy professional service. All that stuff is about $5 billion. So one mental model could be, okay, that $5 billion is going to go away. You need $5 new billion. How are you going to do that? That's not what we believe at all. First of all, we think that the on-prem, and it's not just us, I mean, IDC and Gartner support this, the on-prem stuff is not growing nearly as fast. There's zones of really high fast growth, which we're going after. But overall, they're still predicting low single-digit modest growth. And we could argue, is it low up or low down? But fundamentally, we'd like to gain share and increase that $5 billion. But we think that $5 billion is basically staying there. That's not the question. It's how do you generate growth in an environment like this? So if you look at the cloud as the growth component, that's a different picture. The other piece is if you look financially, what's interesting, Anthony talked about how profitable some of these businesses are. I mean, if we sell software into AWS, we've got no capital cost, no cost of goods sold, nothing physical. It's just money that comes in. So I really pushed on our CFO and asked him, where's the break-even point? I mean, where would you say, never mind another buck of that old-fashioned storage-y stuff, like how much would you accept of pure profit software revenue streaming out of Amazon? The answer's about 5 to 1. And everybody knows software businesses are way more profitable, right? This isn't a new observation, and subscription even more so. So if you think of it that way, if we've got our $5 billion and we add 100 million of this new stuff, well, that 100 million converts to an equivalent of 500 million in profit, and that suddenly is 10% growth. Right? That's all of a sudden, if you can add $1 billion in that space, that billion would be equivalent to the whole 5 billion of the old stuff. All of a sudden, even as you add what looks relatively small in our overall revenue stream from a profitability perspective, in terms of our stock price, we think it would do much more than that, because instead of being that stale old hardware company that can't figure out what cloud means, we actually have a presence and we're doing stuff. And then you'll say, well, but is it modern enough? It's only containers, it's not Lambda yet, or what? Like, fine, we have to keep working on it, but we're in the game now, right? So I think we're in a really interesting place. There's been a lot of questions about styles of thinking, and I had a really interesting conversation with a CIO that created a framework that has lots of bugs with it, but also I thought it was a useful thinking framework, so I'm going to just draw it. So this CIO, very large insurance company, enormous insurance company, and he said, here's my vision. I've got 3 buckets where IT can happen. He called it, the first one is like I'm building systems and putting them together with cables, sort of the traditional client server IT. He was a Brit, so he used the word bespoke, but we might call it configured, right? You design it, it's still virtualized, but here's the zone for some Oracle. VDI is different enough. We're going to have a different pool for that. So that was his first of 3 categories. The second was internal cloud, private cloud. And the distinction for him there was this stuff's just rack and stack, software defined, Ethernet to the top of the cable, right? Very, very uniform. And then the final one was public cloud, including SaaS. So his model, he had these 3. And the model that he wanted to get to was 30%, 30%, 40%. And it was actually Mark and I in this meeting, and we were trying to get our heads around, like, is this dollar or value added? And he's like, he was very vague. And, and eventually I just asked him, well, where are you today? And he said, oh, today it's 100, 0, 0. Right, just to put in perspective some of I think you often work with the more leading edge guys, but we're trying to help along. So it was like, okay. And then, well, what style? I mean, his mental model very much was infrastructural lift and shift. Like, he wants to get from here to here and get from here to here. And, maybe he'd want to be able to bring some back, right? But this was sort of the place that he was playing at, really the IaaS zone.
And by the way, to get from there, where he is today, to the future, he has to do a lot in improving the efficiency in his legacy, that first box, just to free up the money to go do the other stuff, because there's no net new budget coming.
So, but anyway, so we're having this conversation like, okay, we can help. You can run ONTAP in the cloud and use SnapMirror, and it's all, but very, very client, so, platform 2 to use but then one of his guys goes, oh, you forgot, boss, remember that shadow IT survey that we did? And we found, and so it turned out that his definition of 0% included 40,000 cores in AWS. And it's like a big insurance company. But so, and then he was going,
didn't really control them.
Oh yeah, and I don't have my arms around that, and I would like to be able to have that stuff come back, and so this, and it was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You just broke my whole mental model, because if this stuff was done native out here in AWS, then suddenly you're at the PaaS layer, and that stuff, it doesn't just get to come back, right? It's a whole, this is what you were talking about. It's a whole different development model. He had no mental model of that, and so then he was upset. So let me step back a bit to just talk about this, because I learned a lot about CIOs from this whole experience. Number one, even though he didn't understand the details very much at all, I thought it was fascinating that he would see these 3 basic buckets and have a vision of what he was trying to get to financially, right? So people like you can help a lot. I mean, and we're trying to as well, but he doesn't know anything about what it's going to take to get here, and some he can lift and shift, and some he can do greenfield out here. I thought it was ironic that his goal is 40%, but the first time he saw 40,000 cores out there, his instinct was to bring them back, right? How's he ever going to build it up out there if his instinct's to bring it back? But okay, now we're having a discussion. Closely related, well, actually, I want to go somewhere else with this. The other reason I thought that this was so interesting was, remember these 3 categories: configured, next-gen data center, which is the term I'm using for this one-use servers, rack and stack, Ethernet to the top, software-defined, and finally cloud. This is how NetApp thinks about how we help customers. We have lots of customers in this zone today with the traditional fiber channel client server configured environment, and some of them want to get over here, but some of them don't, or at least not all of it. And so our goal is to help them modernize this stuff. How do we help bring them into a different world, possibly with something like Cloud Sync to just get some data up here to do elastic MapReduce on? One of our customers is JPL. So JPL, center of the universe for JPL is Pasadena. And they've got data coming from Mars, off the rover, into the Mars satellites, across the interplanetary internet, into JPL. The lights go off, the sun goes down and the rover stops. They've got a certain number of hours to do all of their processing and decide where the rover goes tomorrow. They couldn't afford all those computers. So they cloud sync to Amazon, do the crunching, send the cloud sync, brings the data back down, and from there it goes back to Mars. It's still this environment, but coupled to this one. And not coupled to old style of this one, it's coupled into EMR. So that's this. In a lot of situations, people say, I love that model of the cloud data center, but I do want to run it myself on-prem, right? I mean, that's building a private cloud, and so SolidFire, a lot of people thought SolidFire was about Flash. It happens to run Flash, but really SolidFire is entirely about this rack and stack. You have 10 and they're full, so you throw 10 more in and now they're all half full. 6 months later, it only grew a little, so you eject those and send them somewhere else. They call it FedEx load balancing. I mean, it is very much that model. And the object storage, because a lot of times people are relying on S3. And then finally, the capabilities out here, which, I mean, we've painted some of the things that we're doing. I had another meeting with a big bank, much further along. They had, it wasn't Kubernetes, but it was a Kubernetes thing, like thing that they had developed themselves and were considering using it. But the CIO of that one, he said, he had a model of building these sort of platform, cross-cloud platforms. And because I mean, one of the big oversimplifications here in the cloud is, it's not like it's just one. You've got these different platforms. There's AWS, there's Azure. Anthony was talking about the different capabilities that they have, and of course they're all trying to build in their special capabilities. So he told me his rule for cloud was he did not want to have any applications from his team that couldn't run both in his private cloud and also in multiple public clouds. And I'll tell you my advice to him. My advice to him was, I think that's a mistake. I think you are foregoing some of the best development, most innovative, most rapid changing development environments. And I think you should make some bets on cloud lock-in and embrace it. Right? Now, does that mean you should simply use it everywhere and be locked in? No, you should do it as a strategy. Do I do 2 or 4 or, and which apps maybe? It reminded me of the old days. Remember, I don't want to judge anybody's age. Remember the early days of graphical user interfaces when there was Windows and Mac and even Sun, like I was a Tom Window Manager guy, but there were like all these different ones. And then there were these companies that said, and every one of those platforms was competing to have the better GUIs, right? And the better APIs. And then there were the cross-platform ones that were saying, hey, if you use our cross-platform GUI interface, it'll run anywhere. Does anybody remember those apps?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Remember what they looked like?
They're terrible.
The companies shipping the cross-platform GUIs were always smaller than Sun or Microsoft or Apple. The GUIs weren't as powerful. They were restricted to the minimum subset of what those things could do, but they always felt weird. Remember, like the buttons were the wrong shape, and you'd click, like nothing worked right. And that's my fear for people who restrict themselves to only the cross-platform stuff. But those things were great, for internal apps often. Like, hey, you're signing a new person, onboarding them, or changing your insurance. It's like, do you really want to build that app 3 times? If you're Spotify, yes, build the app 3 times. So I think there's going to end up being a whole bunch of different ways. Here's the interesting thing, though. In this whole space, one thing which can move more easily, but not always, but is the data piece. Right? I mean, you can have a very traditional client-server Linux, Windows app up here, and yet say, oh, by the way, I'd like to get out, I didn't even write the last layer, but software as a service, suck the data out of software as a service, and run some tools that I know, right? My Python or shell script or whatever, just because, or maybe you want to get the data out of 365 and get it up into the Amazon. The data, often you can move it in more interesting ways, even if it's a completely different development environment. So let's see, I've got like 2 more minutes. I want to tell a final story just to give a sense of how we can help people. We've got a customer called Technology One, and they're a big software vendor. They're actually based in Australia. And they started as a traditional on-prem software. They sell you software, probably a CD at first and then internet download it. They decided to go SaaS, and they were a NetApp customer. So as they went SaaS, their first step was to go into Amazon, and in getting to Amazon, they used ONTAP Cloud as the tool, and so they could do the sort of standard lift and shift and get their environment into Amazon. That evolved for a while, and they ended up with a requirement that they wanted to be able to be both in Amazon and also in Azure. I believe they had some of their big customers had lots of Azure contracts, and so they were pushing them in that direction. And so they went from ONTAP in the cloud to ONTAP next to the cloud in a place that was a colo that had both Amazon and Azure capability. And so then they went to that and swung. And here's what I think is so interesting. They started as a NetApp on-prem customer. They transitioned to a NetApp entirely cloud customer, one cloud, and then using NetApp, they transitioned from there into a half in, half out, straddling 2 clouds customers. And the reason I like this customer so much is it's an early example, but it's exactly the kind of thing that we'd like to be able to help customers with, which is you're outside the cloud, you want to be inside, you're in one cloud, you want to be in 2 clouds, you're trying to figure this stuff. That's an infrastructure-centric example because of where they started. But Anthony's examples show that we're not just thinking about that layer, we're also thinking about the PaaS and SaaS layers. We can't do it all at once. In fact, this analogy of a data fabric, part of what I like about it is a fabric implies you've got a connection from here to here and here to here. We're adding threads to the fabric, and we're trying to figure out what are the exciting ones And also, what are the easy ones, right? We throw ONTAP in the cloud. Let's start with that. It's a bunch of capabilities. And then we're connecting things together and searching for where the revenue is and where the opportunity is, where the customer problems are. But I do think we're in a pretty interesting space. And I think we have a foundation, not only our technology, increasingly the people capabilities we're building up, but also I think our size and focus on data makes us easier for a lot of folks to partner with. I mean, when we think about any hyperscaler versus, say, a Dell EMC or an HP, Dell and EMC are trying to convince people you should never use the cloud. Buy our stuff instead. We're not trying to convince you of that.
You have an interesting problem, though, with your customer base now, where, yes, they know you're a big enough company, you can handle a certain number of hits and things like that, but you're using cloud the way a customer would typically use a cloud, where you're trying stuff to see what works and you're being agile about that. But at the same time, your customers are expecting that whatever you're trying, if they're going to use it, it's going to be there for a long period of time. So it seems to me like you have less opportunity to make those mistakes in that case.
But I think in the cloud environment, that already is a little bit different, which is, Amazon, as an example, AWS is launching how many new services a day? It's a huge number. Many of those are going to end up atrophying. It's not that they're going to be discontinued. It's like people aren't going to really adopt them and they'll kind of atrophy. They're not going to become mainstream.
What's the nice thing about
model than the traditional product model?
Let me just observe, that's not different in the old school physical space. We have done acquisitions, and some of them have turned into long-term successful products,
that's fair.
and some of them have ended up canceled. And there's a funny negotiation and dance with customers where some classes of customers say, whoa, I'll try anything. And there's a saying, if you are at the bleeding edge, you'll get bloody. And other customers are like, no, I don't really want to see that till version 3.0, right? And so there's a dance with them on that. And I think the exact same thing will be true of our services, where are we talking a bleeding edge crazy service we just introduced and we're experimenting? Or is this one that's like, ONTAP in the cloud, we've had that since 2014. Yeah, we're just investing there. So I don't disagree that it's an issue, but I don't think it's new to the cloud, and I think it's resolvable.
Okay.
I think the cloud services allow us to iterate into opportunities more rapidly and iterate out of problems as they come up. So it allows us to course correct a lot easier versus when Arthur and Dave have to ship big, huge boxes, basically, you have to have everything lined up before you ship. And here with cloud services, it's different.
So
the most significant thing I would say is our R&D software teams are a lot more willing to take risks in terms of getting something out earlier because of the cloud delivery models and cloud consumption models, so that they can ensure that there are updates and that the customers pick up the fixes, as opposed to when we were shipping things that ended up stuck in the customer that the customer could choose to update or not. We would end up in this incredible matrix of all of these different kinds of versions of things out there that created a sustaining engineering nightmare that this world is really different in that regard, and that's really powerful, and we're taking advantage of that.
So we're at the end of your time. You want to come up here and wrap it up? I just want to say thank you all for being here, and I know it's a little bit of a leap of faith because we're not the traditional vendor in the space you guys are working, but we're working hard at it. We think it's a fun opportunity.